Welcome to Coffee and a Mic. I'm Chris Clark, President and CEO of the Queen Creek Chamber of Commerce, and today we're delighted to be joined by Congressman Biggs. Congressman, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Chris. Good to be with you and the folks here and those who may be watching.
Congressman, tell us a little bit about what's happening in Washington. What's going on that's going to affect Arizona and the nation as a whole?
So most people in D.C. don't know about this, but there's a new water settlement that's getting ready to be introduced, that the tribes, the counties, the cities, the towns, the states have signed on that affect Arizona's water. And my staff, we just got it, met with some of the tribes, and it looks like probably Greg Stanton's going to carry the bill. Talked with him, and my staff's now going through it because it's one of those, we were just talking before, it's one of those 1,000-page type bills, and so we're going through that to see what's in it, and so that's going to impact Arizona. It's not on the big radar screen, but it is important to Arizona, and I think it's going to probably be introduced before the end of the month, and we hope to have it voted on sometime in September, October. Obviously, we're in what's called the appropriation phase. We're late as always, and so there's appropriations bills that are being considered. We've passed, I'm looking for David, I think 4 or 5, and one failed yesterday, and so there's another 6 to do, but that will consume most of our time going forward. And so those are the two biggest issues. The other issue is actually water is not the biggest issue in D.C. It is to us, but the other one is the border security, what's going on there, and so you had the SAVE Act passed out of the House yesterday, bipartisan, and it will go to the Senate, and we'll see what the Senate does. I mean, no, Mike Lee, senator from Utah, was trying to get the Senate to take it up, and they basically objected, so it's not going to go forward, at least at this point, in a time frame. Now, it could still go forward. There are other avenues and leverage points that it could happen on, but those are probably the biggest issues of the last week to 10 days.
Very good. So just a little bit on the water issue. What will that do for us specifically here in Arizona? That one was a water sharing agreement?
Yes, it is a water sharing agreement. And that's exactly what I'm trying to figure out is who gets benefited in Arizona? How do we get benefited? And the problem, of course, for us is we're lowest priority in Colorado River water. And so we want to get that taken care of. And this ameliorates some of the issues that we had with the tribes, ameliorates ostensibly some of the issues that we had with California and some of the other states. So we're trying to figure out in my office how it benefits us, who's going to get shares of water. And that's important for Pinal County, right? I mean, because Pinal County has got its big water issues right now. And there are other water issues as well, Chris, that I've talked to your group before, but and I've tried to get California to, and I was talking to a member from California actually just yesterday morning, asking him what's going on with California. He says our problem is we're not increasing storage, which they need, because if they increase their storage, it would benefit California, which would then benefit every downstream user. And he said we've got people in California that are actually trying to reduce their storage, to take down dams, and that's a real issue.
Yeah, that seems to be quite the trend to take down the dams and
Right.
Restore the rivers and
Right.
lands. But
Right.
some of their reservoirs are filled, and yet there's a continual talk about refilling the Salton Sea,
Yeah.
which was not a real body of water to begin with. But yeah, so we have to share that water with 7 states,
Right.
all of the tribes, and Mexico, right?
That's correct.
And I saw recently Mexico was talking about they weren't getting their share. And it becomes a bigger fight as we go on with a dwindling supply.
Right.
And you mentioned Pinal County. Of course, that is the water that moves through our canals and Pinal County had to shift to CAP water and then eventually to groundwater. So it's going to be quite the discussion going forward for our food crops.
It is, and Arizona's been really proactive for, actually, in my opinion, for decades. We've kind of led the charge on it. But the good news, I mean, like you've seen, you're increasing storage at the Bartlett Dam because you're increasing the height of the dam, and so there's that. The intersection between Salt River and CAP, that's my understanding is that's underway. That's going to be rehabilitated, so you actually have that intersection there. So if CAP's down and SRP's got surplus, then you can move it and vice versa, so that we have a more manageable, reliable, steady flow of water. And Arizona's probably leads the nation in recharge, probably leads the world outside of Israel in recharge. And so all of those are important for us. But we have what states, people from all over, from other states want, and that's good work environment. We've got a good climate, although it's hotter than it's pretty warm today. But we don't have the humidity. I mean, you were mentioning humidity. I thought, well, yesterday in D.C. was probably 150% humidity, and it's just you drench as you're walking along. But we have the things that people want, so we continue to see an influx of people coming into the state. You have businesses continue to come into the state, and as you do that, we have to make sure that we have the resources going forward. That's why water is, in my opinion, is one of the most critical issues. So when people talk about economic development, you want to talk about economic development, you better be talking about water and how you're going to provide that resource.
Yeah, the water is key. Electricity. All of that, and so we're fortunate to have SRP in this particular area managing all of that for us. But you mentioned the border. So there was a deal that was put forth a while back for border security, and ended up failing in the House.
No, it never got to the House.
Never got to the House.
Failed in the Senate twice.
Okay.
Yeah. This is a misnomer. I mean, just so you know, people blame the House. We take the blame for a lot of things, justifiably so. But in this instance, it's the Senate.
Okay. So where are we with border security? There's been some presidential executive orders, but where are we on border security?
So let's talk. So over a year ago, the House passed out H.R. 2, which took care of everything from asylum laws to unaccompanied minor laws to detention laws and significant border security. It's really a solid bill. The Senate has basically parked it. They don't. Majority Leader Schumer does not want to move it forward, and so the House tried multiple ways to leverage them to move H.R. 2. They won't move H.R. 2. We're still trying to leverage ways to get H.R. 2. Then a bill came out that was put together by, I want to say Josh Hawley, and I can't remember who on the Democrat side, in the Senate. Now, what that would have done is that would have codified a minimum of 2,500 people a day illegally into the country and being sent to the country, dispersed throughout the country. But there were so many holes in that. So, for instance, unaccompanied minors, which is everybody under age of 18, they all would have got in no matter what. And this administration has lost over 100,000 unaccompanied minors that we don't know where they are at all. That's of the hundreds of thousands of unaccompanied minors that have come in. So that was a problematic bill. I won't get into all that, but it failed twice in the Senate. They couldn't get cloture in the Senate twice. So the next step that the president did, he did some executive orders, which kind of tracked that bill. And they also went down to Mexico and asked Mexico to help them out. And President Lopez AMLO, President AMLO down there, is actually kind of weighed in, and so they've kind of tightened it up, coming up from the south. You still have, they didn't do much to tighten up their visa openness, so you still continue to see the flow. And what you have right now is anywhere typically between 3,500 to 6,000 people a day illegally coming into the country that we are encountering. We also, that doesn't include what we call the gotaways. And these are the known, so you have known gotaways, which has been over 2 million in the last 3 years. And then there's this whole bunch we don't know, the unknown gotaways. So what's happening is we're left doing, like we did the SAVE Act, we just passed that out. And what that does is that prohibits any state from allowing anybody to vote, or excuse me, register to vote on a federal ballot without proving citizenship. The reason that that's important is because we have, I shouldn't say reports, this is factual, this is the evidence, is that the bureaucrats that provide social welfare services have been one of the directives from the administration is to actually provide a voter registration form to them without a requirement for citizenship. And so we have a problem with that. And particularly in South Carolina, this was going on this is where most evidence was coming from, South Carolina. So SAVE Act is out there, that passed, it's in the Senate. That's what we've talked about, Mike Lee couldn't get through. I talked to my friends who work down on the border, and it's still overwhelming. I mean, Jay Johnson, who was the Homeland Security Secretary under Obama, said if you have more than 1,000 a day entering encounters, he said you have got a crisis. And so we're still in the 3,500 to 5,000, 6,000 range, which is down from the 9,000 to 12,000 it was 3 months ago, but it's still pretty heavy. Most Tucson sector in which we live is the number 1 or number 2 every week in the number of encounters with illegal aliens. And I would just say if you get on Sector Chief Maudlin and just subscribe to his whatever you call social media, he's going to put out every week he puts out the numbers for that week, and it's really instructive, and it fluctuates. But Tucson's number 1 or number 2 right now. Number 1 and number 2 is competing with is the San Diego area, and most of theirs, believe it or not, are Chinese nationals that are coming through.
Yeah, there's been a lot of reports of various countries. It's not just from Mexico
Right.
or Central America anymore.
That's correct.
And so along those lines, we need immigration. We need people to come and work. We need to be able to track them, get them paying taxes and that sort of thing. How do we get some sort of comprehensive bill that makes it easy to get immigration and visas for people that are qualified to work and would be welcomed here, and then seal out the illegal crossings?
So you're talking effectively what I would call a merit-based approach to legal immigration. And last year we did over 850,000 people were sworn in as U.S. citizens and were naturalized U.S. citizens. We probably did another 1 million green cards legally. That's normal, and that's more than all the other countries in the world combined. By the way, that's how generous the U.S. is on that. So you need to do a merit-based system and revisit it. But there is absolutely, and I'll never. Chris knows that I won't be falsely optimistic until the border is actually under control, and there is the old definition of operational control on the border is met. You won't see really any significant change in immigration policy in a comprehensive way. You won't see it because the guesstimated number, because the numbers are all over the park. You've got somewhere around 12 million people who have illegally entered the country in the last 3 years. The question is, what are they doing? Because most of them have been given parole, which means that they've been given, or they're waiting for asylum claims, and they've been given actually the right to work. They've been given a paper to work. And so are they working? And so you've had an influx. What I'm saying is you've had an influx of millions of people who ostensibly could work. They don't speak our language, many of them, who come in. And I know because I mean, just in my own anecdotal stories, I can go down to the border and where are you from? I'm from Mali. And the kind of that's it. Well, do you speak English? No. You know, and we just keep going like that. So that's a very different set of people who want to come here than what you're talking about, who are ready to come in and contribute to whatever business you have that might need an employee. And so that's a long way of saying you're probably not going to see a comprehensive, any kind of comprehensive immigration reform. You might see some snips around the edges, but until that border is operationally controlled, you're not going to see it.
So immigration under the purview of Congress.
Yeah.
What would it take for us to be able to get something in the House and Senate done?
The border's got to be controlled. That's what I'm telling you.
But I mean, to get those laws that tighten everything up or to be enforced?
Well, what would happen is, I'm trying not to be political here, Chris. I mean, just the policies themselves. So if you go down and talk to the line agents, and actually, if you talk to, there's 9 sectors on the southern border. If you talk to 7 of those chiefs, and they know you're off the record, they'll all tell you, we simply need the policy to change. If the policy were to change and we could actually enforce the law, then all of a sudden you would see control. The border would become closer to operationally controlled.
So ultimately up to the voters?
Yeah, Chris, in a very unpolitical way, yes, it's ultimately up to the voters because it's all policy. It's policy driven. The agents will tell you, we just want to enforce the law. There are some policies that if they were put in place almost immediately, you would see a reduction. And one of those policies is quite frankly, you have to remove people. And one of the EO executive orders that the president put out was to actually allow, from some places, a quicker removal. And so that's why the number that has come down in the last month or so is across the border. It's been because they could turn around and get people out more quickly. If you can't do that, then and you're releasing most people into the country, there is no disincentive to come in, because once you're into the country in this free, open, and transparent society where you have mobility like few places in the world, it's almost impossible to find these people. So, I mean, I could digress and talk about like the Tajikistan terrorists that we've recently found, and the numbers of the 400. They were just released into the country, and we just stumbled onto some of them. And as we stumbled onto some, ICE has been able, Immigration Customs Enforcement has been able to go out and pick up some of these people, but we don't know where literally hundreds of that group are, right?
These are people that our security people believe are from a division of ISIS and ISIS-funded groups?
That's correct. I mean, we're talking people who are on the terrorist watch list. I guess that's what the euphemism is for it. And so they get into the country, and sometimes we're able to find some of them, sometimes we're not. And there's no way to adequately vet them. They get in. So when I talk about comprehensive over here, almost everybody in Congress, at least on my side of the aisle, has said, okay, anything else you want to do over here, there might be some questions and some needs and some concerns and issues. It has to be said over here until we provide for the security of the country by securing the national border.
All excellent points, and I like. Recently, there's been a lot of talk about some of the states that have been receiving some of these illegal immigrants,
Right.
and now they're overrun because they received 100 or 150 in their location, and we're
Right.
talking millions.
That's right.
But changing gears a little bit, and you mentioned some things being attached to the funding and appropriations bills. So we missed a government shutdown by days, or I think it was days, not weeks.
Probably, technically, you actually had the technical shutdown when the Senate cleared out and voted on the next day. So,
Okay. And you've talked about the appropriations process, I think, almost every time you're here.
Yeah.
How it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
And then we've been doing stopgap, go ahead and extend the debt for a certain period of time or a certain dollar amount.
right.
Are we back to the appropriations method?
So just to help everybody understand, there's a law that was passed in the early 70s that requires Congress to pass 12 appropriation bills. You have 12 subjects, and it might be, so you have the education bill, you've got the defense bill, so you have to pass those 12 bills. And the one that went yesterday was the legislative branch funding. And those are required to be done by June 30th. And you'll notice yesterday was not June 30th. and then they're supposed to be done and transmitted to the Senate by June 30th. So the Senate would then have, they wouldn't be taking, if Congress on both houses was vigilant, they would be working through July and August to get their side of the bills done, and then you would have what's called the conference committee, where any kind of disagreements would be worked out in September, so that by the end of the fiscal year, which is September 30th of every year, you would actually have, hopefully, a balanced budget that went through and passed. And the last time that actually happened on time, from the House to the Senate, not the rest of it, but just from the House to the Senate, was 1976. So what we have now is we've gone through, I think it's five, I'm looking for my staff at the back. I think it's 5 bills, 4 have passed, 1 failed. The one yesterday failed. The legislative branch funding failed. And so you have 7 left to go. And here we are, and Congress is out this week because in this, every 4th year, this is the week Congress is out because let's just face it, there's a Republican National Convention, so they're out. We're out. So the reality is, you want to know if we're going to resolve this. The other thing is you've got a debt ceiling, right? So the debt ceiling question is, how much do you raise the debt ceiling? When do you raise the debt ceiling? Why are you raising the debt ceilings? Because you have massive national debt. We're over 35 trillion now in national debt, and we are every 110 days we increase it by $1 trillion. Our interest now on national debt is $1 trillion. Our spend on Department of Defense is just under $1 trillion. These are massive components of spending. So you do the debt. So last year, one of the gripes that some of us had was that the Speaker and the Senate leader and the President agreed that they would take the cap off. So that right now we are operating without a debt ceiling. Technically, there's no debt ceiling, won't kick in until 2025. So that's a huge problem. The second thing is, even with the magnitude of our national debt, which by the way drives our inflation, it also drives the infirmity in our currency in some places. Thank goodness that other countries are in worse shape than us, because we remain strong vis-a-vis certain currencies. But anyway, the point is, what we would do every year is they do what's called a continuing resolution. This is a long way to answer your question. I just want to make sure everybody understands the context. So when you don't get those 12 appropriations bills done, you could get a government shutdown. But just so you know, over the years, Congress has passed stopgap and it's past statutory levels so that now it's only about 12% of the federal government that does, when we say shutdown, there's only about 12% that gets shut down. All of the rest of the 88% just continues to roll on. And most people have no idea that you've shut down. If they don't read the newspaper, they would never even know, because the Social Security checks keep coming, the VA check, all of that keeps happening. So if you don't pass a budget by the September 30th and you don't continue the last year's spending levels, then you would have this shutdown. But the continuing resolution is the way Congress has done it. And I used to know this number is like 35, 45 times in the last 10 years that they've done it. Maybe it's over 100. I can't remember. It's just this massive number of continuing resolutions because Congress punts down the road. And so that's a long way of saying, I think that's what's going to happen this year. And I just want everybody to understand as much as possible that is, the problem with that is almost all the policies that exist will continue to exist. They won't be changed. You're not going to get rid of a duplicative or a wasteful agency because they'll all keep getting funded under the continuing resolution, which is why continuing resolutions are just a horrible way of doing it. I've advocated for a long time, since I got there actually, to do line item for agency by agency. That's what the Congress should be doing. That way you know. I introduced last year with my good staff literally over 500 appropriations bills that were all line item to say this agency is duplicative because this agency is doing the exact same thing, and so this one should go away. And if they would have said, well, we wanted this one to go away, so this one, happy, whatever. But actually, we gave them to them, and not one was adopted. I couldn't even get them to look at it, to be frank.
Line item is the entirety. So
right.
You can pick things to come out or negotiate versus take it or leave it.
That's exactly right. And so with the line item, I mean, none of you guys, I mean, when I had my own law firm, we would never have said something like insurance, $50,000 a year or something like that. I'd want to know how much I'm spending for auto, for renters, for whatever, malpractice, all of that. I want the breakdown. We don't get that breakdown. We get this massive blob of spending, and then to the extent that you get a breakdown, it's in a massive bill that they will give, meaning leadership, that has been negotiated between the Speaker of the House, the Minority Leader of the House, the Majority Leader of the Senate, the Minority Leader of the Senate, and their little team and their staff, and that's called the Four Corners. It's what they negotiated, and they give it to you, and it's this pile of paper like this, and they say, we're going to vote on this tomorrow at 6 p.m. or 10 p.m., whatever it is, so you have a few hours to take a look at it, and you're trying to pull it apart. Very, very poor way, in my opinion, to run a very expensive railroad. And
from what you're saying, it doesn't sound like much chance of ever getting back to some form of normalcy, except perhaps with the Chevron court ruling. Last week, I mentioned at our recent luncheon that this was perhaps an earth-shattering decision in at least Washington and then for the rest of the country, but nobody's talking about it. Tell us a little bit about that and what it might do in Washington to the regulatory agencies.
So the Chevron doctrine came out of a Supreme Court case that basically said that regardless of the intention of Congress, the agencies, when they did their policies and their rules, the courts would presume that was the right way to do it. So even if Congress were to somehow come in, or a plaintiff would come into the court and they'd say, but I mean, there was a congressional intent statement here, the court would say, well, yeah, but the Chevron doctrine says that we don't care what the Congress said, basically. We care what the agency wants to do, right? And that's backwards because Congress is the lawmaking entity. I'll give you an example real quick. So this week, they had the liaison for Veterans Administration come in, and he was asked this question related to the Chevron doctrine and the repeal of the Chevron doctrine in this case. He was asked the question, well, if Congress passed a law, signed into law by President, and it was contrary to your practices, would you do your practices or would you follow the law? And they said, well, we'd do our practices. We wouldn't follow the law. We would ignore the law. And that's what the Chevron doctrine allowed to happen. And that's why you've seen a massive growth in bureaucracy. So what this case does is effectively, I hope it's as earth-shattering as I want it to be, but it actually moves that to the court, which also requires both of them should result in the same thing. That is Congress. We were talking about this beforehand. Congress should be doing single subject rules, single subject bills that actually, with clarity, defines what's to be done by the agency, right? And that's really what would happen. And if that happened, then Congress would actually take control, and which is good, because then if you didn't like the rule or something like that, you could come to us and you'd say, we're going to hold you accountable, Mr. Elected Official. But you couldn't do that under the Chevron doctrine, because we would pass laws and the agencies didn't care. They would just do it anyway, whatever it is they wanted to do, even if it was contrary to law. So this is a really, in that sense, it's earth-shaking, but it puts an onus on Congress that we have to undertake. And my own theory of the case is this: if you're working on EPA issues, for instance, I wouldn't be hiring somebody who just worked on the committee for a few years. What I would be doing is, there's a lawyer in Phoenix that I worked with when I was in the state level, and he's great. He understands these issues. He's litigated these issues over and over again. And what I would do is, I would take some of my staff money and I would hire this guy on a case-by-case basis, contract with him and say, look, what would you do on this particular issue? And he would say, this is what I think should happen after my experience, years of experience trying cases and interpreting the rules. This could be clarified, this could be done, and it would make it better for the citizenry, et cetera. And then I would hire him to help us draft that legislation with particularized language. And then if the agency chose not to, Chris, this is where you come in and you say, we're taking away your money until you actually impose the law the way it's drafted.
And we're talking, to back up just a little bit, this is EPA regulations, Department of Labor, National Labor Relations Board, EEOC, the whole gamut that has been passing regulation after regulation that may not have furthered the intent of the law, but in fact been contrary to it.
That's right.
Or just something that Congress never even spoke to. And we've been seeing a lot of that with the PRO Act that failed in the Senate, has been broken up, sent to the agencies, and then they've been enacting all of these as essentially laws. They're rules you have to follow or else. Yeah, and to get to the utter frustration that I've had is, I would pose to you how many of these rules and regulations actually have criminal sanctions attached to them. And when we contact the Congressional Research Service that knows all this stuff, it's more than 40,000. So there are more than 40,000 ways that a typical businessman or woman in this country can engage in something that otherwise is benign, but actually is been created as a felony by rulemaking as opposed to by Congress. And we've introduced legislation to try to ameliorate that. But it gets back to the whole Chevron thing and this language that's out there that basically says, if you are impacting a broader sector of the economy, then
the law is intended to, or as set forth in the law, then you are acting illegally or extra legally. And so it's a great case, a remarkable case. And like I was telling Chris, I don't know if I told you guys or if you heard us, but I was saying this is one of those deals where all of a sudden, you hoped something would happen. You knew that there was a case going. You didn't know how it was going to happen. Now it happened. And now everybody's like, okay, well, how do we implement this now to make it work? And that's where we are.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out, and
Right.
especially for businesses. As I mentioned, the PRO Act pieces getting broken up and sent out to the different agencies
Right.
to be enacted as regulation, because Congress said, no, we're not going to make it a law. So we'll see how this comes together. One of the other things that we've been talking about and is repatriating companies. So bringing them back, onshoring manufacturing. It's happening to some extent, and whether it's here or somewhere in North America, getting the manufacturing process so we're not being held hostage necessarily by trade agreements.
Yeah, so in my opinion, and talking to some of the economists around the Capitol that we have access to, there are a number of things that have to happen. First of all, I think the tax code needs to be fixed appropriately. There's a move now to actually re-raise business corporate taxes, because some of these taxes that went in effect under Trump's previous administration are now going to be up for expiry, and there are people that want to actually let them expire or raise them even higher. That would be a mistake. You're not going to repatriate on that. The second thing is regulatory relief, which is one of the reasons that I'm excited about the Chevron doctrine going away, is because it allows us to actually modify regulations and that will facilitate companies wanting to come back. Third way is to provide a disincentive to be elsewhere. And one of those things is tariffs, and I think the Ricardian system has been proven to be a total failure internationally, at least currently, because you have too many free riders and breakers at the international level. So I think those tariffs would actually provide disincentive as well. You have to provide incentive for the supply chain and open up the places in this country where we have the supplies and the manufacturing. We have companies that want to develop resources in this country. So for instance, Arizona is a massive uranium cache, but we don't allow that, even though uranium mining has now been cleaned up dramatically and how they're able to do that. So you have to do that. And I would also suggest that well, I'll leave that for, I know you're going to ask me another question. I'll save that part for another question. But those are some basic things that you can do to provide those incentives to come back. I also think that you need to, it's going to depend on education and a qualified workforce as well. But a lot of those jobs coming across and that they will bring back are manufacturing jobs that could be in-house trained. And so you want to make sure that you provide those incentives, which I think are appropriate with tax relief, regulatory relief, to train your workforce. I talked to the Taiwanese ambassador this week, and they brought in 1,000 engineers from Taiwan to work at TSMC. But they're leaving. They will be leaving as soon as that workforce develops. They need them elsewhere. They might go to Wisconsin, there's a plant in Wisconsin. They might go back, repatriate themselves back to Taiwan. But the point is, we didn't have enough workers there. We got them, they're 1,000 workers. They're in. They're not going to be there permanently. They're temporary. But that's an idea. It's not technically a repatriated company, but it is a company that relocated here, and particularly in Arizona, because of tremendous advantages that we have. And that's, in the end, if you can provide those advantages, companies will come back.
And I think one thing in particular that we've learned is that there are certain critical industries, and
Yeah.
is Congress looking at those to protect those supply chains? So energy production, pharmaceuticals, lithium in the batteries, and those sorts of industries.
Yeah, we are, and we've actually, legislation has been introduced on all of those areas. I do believe, again, this is policy driven. The energy, I don't understand why you would approve the Gulf Stream 2 pipeline, but you would kill the Keystone XL pipeline, for instance. Those didn't make, those are contrary, and one harms the U.S. Actually, we're harmed on both of those, right? So LNG, really difficult right now to get going, and natural gas is cheap, clean, and we have a plethora of that. So there's ways that we can do it, but we need energy prices to drop, and they drop when you have an open, competitive market. And it doesn't just impact our economy, it impacts what's going on, for instance, in Russia. Russia needs oil to be at $60 a barrel or higher to fund its government, and anything above that goes to fund its military or adventurism. And the problem with that is, when we say we're not going to produce, we're not going to allow development, exploration, extraction, refinement, well, guess what? The supply becomes scarce, price goes up. I mean, this is just simple economics. And so Russia's able to actually go forward with their ambitions, which it just seems odd to me. And when we start importing 1 million barrels a day, which we did from Venezuela, we got a major problem on our hand, because we're funding people who don't like us because we simply won't use our resources that we have, and the planet doesn't get any cleaner, for sure, especially since the U.S. Has the cleanest extraction mechanisms in the world. So, I mean, there's a lot to this, but energy has to come back. Critical minerals have to come back. The PPE type stuff we saw during COVID, the pharmacies, all of that can come back, but we are providing disincentives to stay in this country. You're seeing more companies are outsourcing down. That's not really where we want to go.
Well, exactly, but again, policy driven, so it's going to be
policy driven.
Up to the voters again. One other thing that we wanted to talk about is transportation here in the East Valley in particular, and how Congress might be able to help us. We got some money for the I-10 widening, but there's no money for the 202 and the 24 in the state budget. And what are the opportunities that Congress can help us?
So I'm going to begin first with I'm going to begin with 2 or 3 things, and then I'll try to answer your question more directly. First of all, we need NEPA to be fixed, and we need the regulatory framework to be changed. Those 2 things right there have been estimated to add about 150% of actual cost per lane mile than real, right? So if you can ameliorate that stuff, then you actually reduce the cost, which makes it more affordable for cities, towns, states, and counties to actually build the roads that we need here in the East Valley, for instance. So that's where Congress could really be helpful. Policy driven again. It's tough right now to get that, even though legislation has been introduced. And we've also tried to leverage it in appropriations bills, by the way. So the second thing is how much money is available. The Congress directs literally billions and billions of dollars for infrastructure projects annually. And it's just a matter of who's going to get those dollars, and it's hard to push it back. I mean, it really is hard to get it where you want it to be. The third thing is, contextually, there are some things the federal government is supposed to do constitutionally and things we're not supposed to do. We are funding so much of what we're not supposed to do that we can't direct money where necessarily, in my opinion, we're constitutionally required to send it. So that's a third problem. And I guess the fourth issue is getting back to what we talked about earlier. If you're just governing with continuing resolutions and you pass out a transportation and infrastructure appropriations bill, if you're running it on everything's going to go like last year, which is what a CR does, then you never ever can make corrections into the spending, and that's part of our problem as well. So it gets back to fundamentally, in my opinion, the institution is broken in some ways, and not the least of which is failure to actually appropriate in the legally mandated way. If we did that, you and I would have a cleaner conversation about why, what, how you're getting money or you're not getting money, where you need money and you don't need money. Sorry to, I'm not going to sugarcoat anything, but that's really kind of where it is.
So we did get additional funding for the airport, which was amazingly helpful. So with the new tower, they're able to do all kinds of new flights in there. And Phoenix.
We just need to man it, be able to man the tower, staff the tower, right?
Staff the tower with air traffic controllers.
Right.
But one problem at a time, right?
I wish it was one problem at a time, Chris.
Very good. Well, we've reached just about the end of our time. At this point, any questions from the audience that we haven't taken?
I have one.
Yeah.
So I deal with alternative lending for small businesses.
Okay.
Recently, the SBA has changed the way that they are approving loans, specifically SBA loans for small businesses, going off an SBSS score rather than the other things. And it's a cumulative total in which they're approving those for. Over the last year, nearly 80% of small businesses have said that they're experiencing some type of financial unease. With the new SBSS score, it really heavily weights personal FICO over business plans, financials, revenue, and more people are getting turned away than the already high 75 to 80% clip of traditional funding turning small businesses away. With small businesses really being the lifeblood of the American economy, how can you fix that? So
we actually introduced legislation to make changes in that, because that's a directive. This gets back to the Chevron thing. That's in my opinion, that's a misapplication of the actual statute, right? So this administration changed how they were going to code everything and rate it, and so we actually introduced legislation.
Thanks for being here.
My pleasure, thank you.
I have a question. I was wondering just a little bit about healthcare. In public education, it's our second largest expense, and it's extremely expensive for, we pay for the employee, but for families to be part of that, as we usually see a large influx of women in public education and not men, because it's extremely expensive, for families to live in. A lot of women are in it, it's a second income, but we're starting to see the expense of health insurance is so expensive, and family insurance is being incredibly expensive. Is there anything going on in the health insurance area?
Frankly, not much, and there should be, but I mean, this gets back to the Affordable Care Act, which turned out to be not real affordable. There has been, over the years since I've been in Congress, different attempts to try to rein that in, but it hasn't been, none of those have been successful. I met recently, probably 3 weeks ago, with a fellow who, I shouldn't say fellow, a guy, an expert in this area, and the reason for talking to him is some of us are hopeful that a new policy maker, a chief policy maker will be elected, and that we can have influence in this, not just this area, but all across the board with small business, all of that. And so we're trying to put together a 100-day plan. What would you do? And so to be frank with you, there's not been much done by either side of the aisle on that in recently. And because I'm told from my friends across the aisle that everything's hunky-dory because more people are receiving some kind of quasi-insurance benefit than ever. But it's not, in my opinion, it's not working out real well, because if you were the only person that ever mentioned that, I'd say, well, it seems to be working well. You're not the only person that's ever mentioned that to me, and so it's a real problem. And I'm hopeful that we can make changes come January of 2025. Now, you want me to expand on how those changes need to? I won't talk about necessarily policy, but I'll talk about the way the structure gets and how you make changes policy-wise. Because the Senate requires 60 votes on anything other than a budget. There's just, and the Senate is split almost exactly 50-50, right? There's almost no way to get your 60 votes on most things, such as a health care reform. So the only thing that you've got is when you pass a budget, the new president and the new Congress coming in, they get to do what's called reconciliation bills. And we hope to be able to do 2 reconciliation bills. Sorry, it's not going to be single subject. It's going to be a massive package of reconciliation. It has to be tied to spending, and you can throw the policy in there, but it has to be tied to spending. But once you get past this reconciliation, you probably won't see a lot of things happen. But that's where we would try to do something on health care, social welfare reform, even border, I mean, you just name it. It's going to come in a reconciliation package. So, yeah, thanks.
Well, Congressman, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
We've enjoyed having you here.
It's always good to be here, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to SRP for making this production possible.
Yeah.